Assalamu alaikum, my beloved Ustad and sister. Ahlan wa sahlan, welcome. And today I see we're going medical route. And also, the first, we're speaking about a great iconic academic as well, and that's Rufaya Al-Aslamia. I hope I've said it correctly. You can correct me if I did not. And she's the first female acknowledged to be the first female surgeon and first nurse in the world. So please enlighten us.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. We're speaking about Rufaya Al-Aslamia Al-Ansariya. So she's the first doctor, nurse and surgeon, female surgeon in Islam, but the first nurse in history of Islam. In fact, in history, as we'll go on to see now. During the time of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, there were a few female physicians who contributed in the provision of healthcare. And unfortunately, those who recorded their history didn't do their achievements justice and their accomplishments are not well known. So that is why when you speak about somebody like Shifa bint Abdullah or Rufaya Al-Aslamia, not many people know about her. The Greeks were originally credited with the medicine, but the Greeks didn't have hospitals. Physicians used to treat their patients at home, and it was a practice that continued for hundreds of years until they built separate buildings for the sick. And obviously, then the Romans coined the term hospital, which comes from the word hospitum, which means to entertain. And then with the spread of Islam in the 7th century, that is when Muslims or people rather started knowing who Muslim doctors and healthcare workers are. And they pushed the boundaries further, especially in the lifetime of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, with the first known Islamic care center. The advancement of medicine started by encouraging translation of Greek texts into Arabic. And for those of you who've listened last year, even with Sutayt al-Muhammali in the Abbasid eras, Umayyad eras, the golden age of Islam, 9th and 10th century. Then we had plenty of evidence to indicate that women practiced in the field of medicine in the early years of Islam and even afterwards. But at the forefront of this initiative, at the forefront of medicine, was a compassionate, driven, pioneering Muslim woman, a Sahabiya called Rufaya Al-Aslamia, who made indisputable contributions to the field of science and medicine in the early days of Islam. She was born into the Bani Aslam tribe in Medina, and it was reported that Rufaya radiallahu anha embraced Islam in Masjid al-Nabawi, the Prophet's mosque in Medina after Hijrah, and joined Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam in many battles. Under the tutelage of her father, Sa'uda Al-Aslami, a renowned physician, Rufaya honed her skills and became an expert healer in her own right. And despite the limitations imposed on her as a woman, back then it was a very patriarchal society before the birth of Islam. Rufaya's work in field hospitals was widely recognized, and she was called upon by Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam to treat the wounded in battles. Rufaya radiallahu anha was not only the very first Muslim nurse and surgeon, but she was considered to be the very first nurse in history as well. This was like 1,200 years before Florence Nightingale was credited for introducing modern medicine, nursing to the world. So obviously, there are no images or pictures of her because of those times, but the little that we do know is taken from hadith, and she herself was narrator of hadith. So this pioneer woman in the field of medicine, being the first female nurse and surgeon, was known for her kindness, her clinical expertise, her organizational skills, and she went on to train other women, including the Honorable Aisha radiallahu anha, Salama. So when we spoke about in Nusayba bin Ka'b, and we said that she went in Uhud and she went on battle with the other woman, and we mentioned those women. Rufaya was at the forefront of it. So with her clinical skills, she trained other women to be nurses and to work in the area of healthcare. She also worked as a social worker. She helped to solve social problems associated with disease. And in addition to this, she helped children in need and took care of orphans and the disabled and the poor. So she was a true humanitarian in every sense of the word. In addition to her medical work, these qualities have earned her a special place in our history and, more importantly, in the eyes of Allah and Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So, in the pre Islamic time, there's not much known about the history of nursing. A deep understanding of religious and cultural norms, rather, will give us some insight into the roles and responsibilities of nurses in those times. So, in the Christian belief back then, they believed disease was a divine punishment. So, Muslims held a different view where, and we still do, we hold disease as being from Allah, a high regard of cleansing the body, rather, washing your sins, whatever you feel is beneficial for the Muslim. And this is how Muslims viewed illness. They also viewed illness with regards to dietary therapy, with salah being as a regimen also. So it was spiritual and not just physical. So during the wars, medical treatment was largely provided by physicians who would visit patients, diagnose them, and treat their ailments. Nurses were very limited in their duties. They were providing physical and emotional support, physical comfort, emotional support. And their responsibilities were just limited to non invasive care of patients. But when the wars had died and civil unrest had decreased, and there were better methods of treating the sick, and they were constructing hospitals, nurses were still really like limited to basic tasks such as serving food or just giving medicine. And it's worth remembering that the first female physician in England, Elizabeth Blackwell, was registered in 1858 after coming from the US, where she had qualified in 1849. So there's a big, rich history of female Muslim physicians in Islam, which is unlike those in the West. And this goes back centuries. At the start of it all was obviously Rufayda radiallahu anha. She was the first in Islamic history to develop or be in charge, rather, of a military mobile field medical center. And it's a big name, but if you look at it from what they had during the Battle of the Trench, or Khandak or Ahzab, whatever you'd like to call it, she started this medical tent, and it's mobile. And this idea that nobody had at the time would later be further developed during the rise of the Islamic civilization. And that we know was known as or called Bimaristans, which means, Bimar coming from the word sick and stan meaning place, which they were hospitals, but amazing hospitals. And in Arabic or Turkish, they were known as Darushifa. These hospitals built on and all on what Islam is teaching us. Well, I don't want to go into detail of that because we're speaking about Rufayda anha, but just illustrating to you that these people were so successful because they based everything on Quran and Sunnah. So, for instance, in the Bimaristans, everybody was accepted. Nobody was turned away. It didn't matter your race, your religion, your gender, your citizenship, whatever. Uh, and it was also for people with mental illnesses. Quran was the basis of the development of the ethics in the hospital. As we saw in COVID, making a comeback with washing the hands and all these kind of things. This is what the Bimaristans were about, and it's all started with Rufayda radiallahu anha. So she joined the army in the Battle of Badr, supporting the fighters, treating their wounds, as she did for Sa'ad radiallahu anhu. Sa'ad bin Mu'adh, if you remember, got injured with an arrow. And at the request of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, according to the hadith in Bukhari, she treated him, and we know that an arrow was removed from his arm, but she was the one who removed the arrow. It was in her tent that she removed the arrow. So the fact that Sa'ad bin Mu'adh radiallahu anhu was transferred to her tent for treatment indicates that it is permissible for a woman to practice her profession outside her home because she was not at home. And by analogy, we can deduce that it's permissible for a female doctor to open a clinic outside her home for the treatment of women and children. And by doing this, she's fulfilling the duty of fard al kifaya, which means it's that fard or that duty that falls on the entire community. If some people fulfill it, the responsibility is absolved, like it's rested. Otherwise, if nobody fulfills it, obviously everybody will be held accountable. So this is the one viewpoint. So there's another hadith that describes Muslim women at the beginning of Islam that were practicing a profession, and this is narrated by Hafsa radiallahu anha, concerning a woman who used to treat the wounded. And Bukhari rahimahullah reported in his Sahih that Hafsa said, a woman came and she stayed at the fort of the Bani Khalaf and told us about her sister. Her sister's husband used to go on military campaigns with Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and he would have been on 12 campaigns, and his wife had accompanied on 6. She said, we used to treat the wounded and take care of the sick, to the end of the hadith. But that is narrated in Bukhari. So the point I'm trying to make here is that it was permissible to treat males. You see here that Rufayda radiallahu anha, it was an emergency. She needed to remove the arrow from Sa'uda radiallahu anha. And also in other battles, she was away from home. She was not just treating women. So a woman's work as a nurse or doctor, like everything in our lives, regulated by the rules in Sharia. That is what regulates our work. Ibn Hajar rahimullah commented on this hadith, and he mentioned that on these conditions that we learn from the hadith, a woman is allowed to offer medical treatment to a non-mahram male, even if she's not, non-mahram means a person she's not related to, and the woman is allowed to offer medical treatment to a non-mahram man. For example, some said only indirect forms, but she was touching Sa'ad radiallahu anhu because she had to. There was no fear of temptation. It was an emergency situation or life-saving. So there is our proof for people who say that maybe it is impermissible for girls to have education. No. We're seeing this woman benefit how many people? She benefited nations, right? Later we see in hospital wards, and this whole thing of treating, and later on in the Bimaristans where they would treat, they would separate according to your illness, and they would also segregate according to gender. So we see in the hospital wards, and this is Islamic norm, obviously, necessitating the segregation of the hospital wards based on gender. And now in contemporary times, people are laxed on that, hospitals are laxed on that, but they still separate according to what your ailment is. And these are all things that they learnt from the Muslims. And again, the forerunner, Rufayda, learning it from her father, radiallahu anha. So these clinics, they had a choice. You can treat females only, you can treat males and females, but the clinics that were only for females made it easier for sick women to come to a female doctor. Getting back to Rufayda radiallahu anha, her dedication and her skill was so remarkable to the point that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam himself acknowledged her for her contributions. When the army was getting ready to go to Khaybar, Rufayda radiallahu anha and her companions, the other Sahabiyat, came to Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and they asked for permission to go out with them and tend to the injured. When we spoke about the woman accompanying Khandak and Khaybar with Nusayba, it was Rufayda radiallahu anha who led the group of volunteer nurses, if you like, who went to the battlefield during the battles and provided care to the casualties of war. She was also given spoils of war, Khanima, she was given her portion, similar to any fighter in the battle, which means that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam recognized her role in the battle. It wasn't that he said, you're not allowed to come or you're not allowed to treat because you're a female. No, this wasn't the case. She also helped in treating many other Sahaba, even not only in battle, even out of battle, she helped. So these are showing us, and it's examples on how we should love. And somehow, someway, we miss that point, where even in the time of where you look at Western medicine and you see the doctors or physicians in earlier times, they used to report against the woman. They wanted it to be solely male. And here we see, like many centuries afterwards, with the Turkish doctor and surgeon Sharafuddin Sabunoglu, we find an open-minded view of women, And obviously, again, taking the example of Nabi Sallallahu, he included female practitioners in his complex, in his surgery, and he was an obstetrician, and he was a surgeon, worked with other female surgeons, you know. And this wasn't happening in the West. In the West, they were working against the female healers. So I think these are so important for us to teach our children. They should know who Rufayda Al-Aslamia is. They should know. And I added her in the brave woman because, first of all, I think to be a pioneer in your field, you need to be brave. If you're the first woman who's doing something, you are brave, you are courageous, you have guts. And that is why I added her. Also, she was on the battlefield, and it also takes a lot of courage to be on the battlefield in her line of work. There was another lady also, and we spoke about Al Shifa, or Ashifa rather. Um, and this woman was so intelligent. She was the first woman, one of the first few that could read and write. When there were like only 20 people that could read and write, Ashifa, her name was Layla actually, Layla bint Abdullah, and she was Qurayshi. She was actually from the Banu Adi, which made her relative to Hafsa and Umar an. But she was literate in this time of illiteracy. She was the first female teacher in the time of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And she was also involved in public administration. And everybody used to go to her and, get treatment from her. She used to make up medicine, preventative treatment against bites. They used to have insect bites or ant bites, like or eczema, whatever you want to call it. And she would train and treat people with these skin conditions. And she was appointed in the time of Umar anhu as a market inspector in Medina. And she was actually the first woman to hold such a public office. And she was also a woman who reported a hadith from Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, like Rufayda radiallahu anh, also reported a hadith from Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, which is narrated by Bukhari, Abu Dawud, and Nasa'i. She's left such a mark in the history, and it's not just in Islam, but she's left such a mark in the world that there are many colleges that use her name, her namesake, as when they're giving prizes or awards. Or so the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland, also at the University of Bahrain, honors her legacy by awarding the prestigious Rufayda Al-Aslamia Prize in Nursing to a student who consistently excels in delivering superb care to patients. And this is the amazing legacy. In all these stories, we are looking at, first of all, the fear of Allah. We are looking at the love of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. We are also looking at intelligence and how they use it. And we are looking at men who support women. That's the big thing, men who support women. And I think without that, we can't get to an environment that is good for everyone. If it's specifically only patriarchal and women shouldn't be seen or heard, or how do we exist? How do we raise children? How do we raise sons who respect women? How do we raise daughters who can who are ambitious and want more and can be more and can deliver? How do we do that? So these are not just stories, they are our beautiful history, and they should be lessons, and they should be spoken about at our table. And if our child comes to us and says, I want to become a doctor, these are the things we should tell them, because their vision was so great and they left indelible marks in history.
Sister Ustad and Sister Soda, shukran for this. Every week you bring another aspect in terms of from history. So you bring evidence. And that's what I like about the series is it's not on hearsay. These are iconic, legendary, trailblazing mothers and daughters in from the annals of Islamic history. And these are their lived experiences.
Mhm.
These women were in the time of our beloved Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Their
Sure.
legacies have left uh, marks for academia to then, or people to aspire to get awards in their names, and also it does punks many, I think, self-interest and myths when it comes to women and our contribution to society as a whole in
Mhm.
terms of um, we always told we need to be at the back and not being seen, and
Correct.
females should not study, especially pursue of medicine in certain climates and that. But you've brought evidence, and for me that's important because it's evidence led, and you've given us facts as well. So for me, evidence and facts, and also hope in terms of our younger generation of females, uh, iconic mothers and sisters that are mentors and people that they can aspire to be and
Mhm.
want to be in various fields. So Jazakallah for the, I know it takes a lot of research, and I know time is always precious, but in Ramadan, time is a lot more precious because there's so much we want to do and we want to amplify in this month. So we appreciate all the time you take in researching for the segment. It's much appreciated, and let me tell you, it's really, really been beneficial. And the good
Alhamdulillah.
thing is, it's going to be archived, so it's always there on Salam Media YouTube, and we soon it will be ready for podcast, and then it's going to be there forever for everybody to share. So Jazakallah for your time and effort. Until next week, may you be under the mercy and the blessings of the Almighty. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله.
We're going to go for a break, and our next segment, yes, our very, very important third pillar of Islam, and that is discharging of our zakat. So, learning all about zakat, which is vital, vital, vital. And this is brought to us by Senze, South African National Zakat Fund. All this after the break.